Good morning. It's in the 40s in Plano, Texas, and raining. Not a good way to start the morning, in my opinion. I moved to Texas because one of the reasons was I wanted warmer weather. We do get that, but it does still get pretty cold in the winter for about 3 months. Anyway, enough of that. It's Steve, behavioral analyst, and I'm happy to join you guys again today. I know this was not announced. Well, it doesn't really matter because you can still see the video. I wanted to talk about, hey, Rebecca, I wanted to talk about something that happened to me just last week, end of the week. Oftentimes we get what I call a one-off, which is somebody finds us online and purchases a behavioral analysis and then signs up to talk to me for an hour, or 30 minutes in this case. Hey, Alan. So I see people popping on here, so that's cool. But anyway, this individual started off by taking our free assessment, and it is a what I call a DISC Mini. We offer that for free. A lot of colleges use it when they're taking a psychology class and they talk about human behavior. I get a lot of .edus in there, so we know that students are taking this because they don't want to pay for something, they just need it for class, so that's cool. So anyway, they started off with a free mini disc and then decided they wanted the full gamut, and you can get that from us without a conversation, just sort of a paper PDF report for very short money. And you can also upgrade to a debrief with me, which is also a lot less expensive than our corporate clients because they get things a little differently. But anyway, so that's available to you if you're interested in that. But in this case, this gentleman, I'm going to call John Smith, okay, for the sake of privacy. But he called in, I believe he came from Canada. And I ran his profile, which I captured. Now, what I've done is I've transferred the information into a report format that's going to be coming next year. It's getting set to go into programming right now, but templates are all built and statement sets are all done. It's a pretty raw deep dive into human behavior and primarily your emotional structure, and your task orientations, how you tend to think, how you formulate strategies when you're in a group, and how you maintain what we call group balance, like keeping your reputation solid within a group. In other words, not the person people want to avoid. But it's going to be very powerful. But I'm pretty excited about that. It's taken a long time to get this thing together. But anyway, we're going to switch to share screen or screen share here so that you can see this report that came through. And so what I've got here is a natural graph of the 4 primary emotions, which is the only emotions we like to deal with around here because they pretty much can tell us anything. So we've measured anger, optimism, patience, and fear on this individual. And this individual we're going to call John. He called in and wanted a debriefing. So I began to debrief him on his what we call emotional energies. So energies are the energy that our emotions provide for doing anything in the world. So what kind of energy is provided by your brain type? And so here we're measuring, let's start off with the anger emotion. So you could see his numbers fall to the left That's a lower region, so the intensity is lower, not higher, although it is still an intensity. And this lower intensity brings about a position in the world, so your energies are energized for surrender rather than being energized for being resolute. Now, we're all different. And you need to know how to maximize your behavioral assets. We all have assets, and we don't know what they are typically as people. We don't realize what our assets are. What we do is we compare ourselves among ourselves and call it smart. And it's not a smart thing to do, because you can't compare one thing to another thing. And the other thing is, you can't compare people to people. Now, that might sound weird to you, but you can't compare people to objects, and you can't compare people to people. Should I get rid of the baby or the car? Like, that's not a good way to think. And if you think that way, you would be considered a sociopath. Should I get rid of my son or my daughter? We typically don't do that. Or do I love my son more or my daughter more? We typically don't do that either. If you do, you're going to have problems in raising your children, and your children are going to have problems in raising their children, and on it'll go. So that's not what we do. But yet, in the work world, this is all we do. We look at what other people are doing, and we wish we could do that. Or we look at what other people look like, and we wish we looked like that. On and on that can go. But you can't compare people to other people, because human beings have what's known as inherent value. And inherent value is non-comparable. And so I don't want to get into this, because I've talked about this all the time. And if you look at any of the other videos out there of me, you're going to hear more on that. And you can go do that. But I need to make that known up front. So when I profiled John and was helping him leverage his assets, a couple things came up which I want to share with you. So looking at his profile, just look at this graph I've got up here, or these 4 graphs. We got anger, optimism, patience, and fear, and these are the primary emotions. So you can see there are higher intensities in patience and fear, and lower intensities in anger and optimism. Okay, voila, there you have it. What does that mean? It simply means that this individual, we're calling John, is a logical stepwise thinker. That's what one of his assets are, his ability to think logically and stabilize environments. So John is a stabilizer. He has a stable brain that when it gets in the canoe, it sits down and puts on its life jacket and puts an oar in the water. That's pretty much what a stabilizer does. Destabilizers don't do that. They get in the canoe, but they don't sit down. They don't put on a life jacket, and they begin walking around in the canoe. Now, if you've ever been in a canoe with somebody walking around in it and you're seated, what do? Well, you certainly don't act nonchalant. What you will do is you'll drop the oar, hold onto the sides, and try to stabilize the boat. Now, you're either a stabilizer or you're not a stabilizer. Good or bad? Neither. It has nothing to do with good or bad. But understanding that you are a stabilizer is really important. Now, this individual we're calling John was in an environment where all the people around him that he worked with were destabilizing people. So imagine going to work, and work is like a real long canoe, and you're sitting in there trying to do your work, and 6 people are walking around in your boat. I want you to picture it. And so when I began to talk about John's assets, he started telling me, this is what I don't like about myself. And I'm like, wait a minute, what do you mean this is what you don't like about yourself? This is how you're wired. There's nothing wrong with it. Well, this is how I feel, and when I'm working with these people, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, here's what's happening. You're a stabilizing type, and you're in a destabilized environment. So it's not you, it's your environment. There's nothing wrong with you. Matter of fact, in job searching and when I'm doing some recruiting efforts for an organization or what have you, we're looking for people just like you to fill a particular spot because we need those assets. And so, what do we got here? Rebecca's making a comment. Yes, I like the metaphor of how a $50 bill has the same value, whether it's crisp and new, crumpled, or wet and muddy. Yeah, would you still like to have it in all the different forms? I think so. Good point, Rebecca. So we're all different, but we got to understand what those differences are. And so what was happening was John was seeing himself as a misfit. And the reason why, the being, is because he was missing the fit. What does that mean? It means if you're a destabilizing brain type and you're working with a stabilizing brain type, you're going to think the stabilizing brain type is too slow. Because destabilizers tend, not always, but tend to be fast and furious, whereas stabilizers are slower and more methodical. My CPA is a very, very slow, low-energied, methodical brain type. Well, that's why he's a CPA, for heaven's sakes. When my tax returns are done, they're done right the first time. And so it's important to know that when I submit my information to this person, it's not going to come back tomorrow. It's going to be a while. And so I know that, and therefore I adjust myself to understand that, with this individual, he's slower and methodical, but that's what I want. It's taxes, for heaven's sakes. Okay, so one of the things you need to understand, let me go to the next page in this report. That's not out yet, by the way, but it will be next year. Looking at the current orientations. So the orientations changed just a little bit. So the preserving orientation, the responsive orientation, attracting orientation, taking orientation. So what happens with a lower dominant trait or a low anger impulse within the taking orientation? Well, rather than taking things by force, you surrender to the circumstances, good or bad. It depends. What are the circumstances? So what John was doing was he was surrendering to the circumstance because he did not have the emotional energy to make anything happen, to make things different, right? So what he did was he was in this situation sort of rolling with the punches and becoming more responsive and preservation driven. So look at the graph. So look at the responsive orientation. When he's high, he became hopeful but hesitating to act. Well, I don't know what they're going to do. What if I tell them, to relax or to slow down or to give me something with some semblance of order so that I can process it better, because John is a processing brain. He doesn't guess, whereas, hyper influencers or extreme dominant type people, they guess. And so because he's methodical, it's tough when you're dealing with, extreme interfering types, destabilizing types. And so he was hoping this will change. Well, hope doesn't really do anything when it comes to change. It causes you to wish inside your mind, but you don't translate any of this to the outside, because people that have high patient emotions never tell you actually where they stand on the issues, good or bad. Well, neither. It's just the way they do it. So in this situation, it wasn't working for him. It was now beginning to work against him. And that's because of the tidal wave of circumstance. He's also preserving orientation, which means he's cautious and doubtful. So people that are extremely fear-oriented, that's not negative. Fear-oriented means you pay attention. So people that pay attention really well tend to doubt things will change because they look at things through a realistic lens rather than an unrealistic lens. People that look through unrealistic lenses are always thinking it's going to be awesome, when in reality it's likely not going to work in certain situations. But realists know it's not going to work, and they may voice that in an effort to save you from yourself. But they, the outgoing people always see that as a rain on their parade. So anyway, very, very strong thinking type we have here. Moving on to the next set of graphs. These are called task orientations. So how does this person orient in the tasking? Forceful? No. No, the anger emotion, when it's in play, is forceful. In other words, it makes things happen. But what did John do? He was waiting for something to happen. Well, if nobody else wants to change, then nothing's going to happen. You can wait forever and nothing will happen. Well, what about his emotional state when it comes to tasking orientations? This optimistic piece. Is he imagining great things? No. He's doubting things will happen. Why is he doubting things will happen? Because he knows that the odds of changing are slim. Think of Star Wars. If you saw the original Star Wars movie, if you remember the wonderful scene in the Millennium Falcon with Han Solo and C-3PO. So Han Solo is an active brain type, and C-3PO is a passive brain type, much like our person here we're looking at, John. And so remember C-3PO telling Han Solo the odds of successfully navigating an asteroid field. He knew what they were. And what did Han Solo say? Never tell me the odds. Why? Because you're raining on my parade. So John knows the odds of somebody changing that he's dealing with. He knows they're not good. So he's a realist. So because he's a realist, he's doubtful. And he's correct. So that's not a negative. So when it comes to things happening, what is he doing? He's hoping things change, but he sort of knows better, right? So he doubts things will happen. So if you look at the yellow line and the blue line here, you got two doubts on things happening and one hope. So what are the odds of you changing anything in that environment? How about 0? Unless somebody else does something, you ain't going to do anything, good or bad. Well, it depends, right? It's not good or bad in and of itself. It just is. In the right environment, it can be wonderful. In the wrong environment, it's not wonderful. It doesn't feel good. And so it's important to understand how this works. Let's go to the next set of graphs that we're going to have. So these might look familiar to some. Okay, so these graphs represent current orientations, so taking, attracting, responding, and preserving, the TARP letters, and then dominant, inducement, submission, and conscientiousness in the disc that most people are familiar with. But look at this. So are you surviving your work? Or are you thriving in your work? And so, looking at John's graph, we see he's starting to survive his workplace because the preserving attitude, the preserving orientation, which is a fear emotion, is energized by compliance. So it's energized by keeping things in order. And that's the energy in a high fear emotion when it's in play in a greater dimension. But if you're surviving in your work, you start to protect yourself. When you're thriving in your work, you just are really good at organizing the things you work with. And what was happening was he didn't have time to organize because things were happening at a very rapid pace. So he just ended up trying to protect what he had. This is what we called hunkering in the bunker. So rather than taking any hills, he simply gets a new position of holding a fort. And then in his responsive dimension, rather than providing everyone with what they need that worked with him, he was depending on certain situations to work a particular way. So there was an over-dependence on everybody else doing something because he couldn't keep up with the pace that was created by all these different types. So when I spoke with him, I started to tell him how important his style is and that it's relevant in situations where we need this type of thinking. There are plenty of environments out there that pay you money to think and act the way you do. This goes for everybody. Everybody has what I've recently termed a genius talent, and I've gotten that term from a friend I met in Arizona when I was speaking out there. His name's John Hitler. And if you want to know more about John, he's an anomaly. I mean, this guy is amazing at what he does. He's a consultant, and you can find him at evokinggenius.com, evokinggenius.com, and he'll help you discover your unique genius talent. And what John says is our talent, our unique talent, are like fingerprints. You're the only one that has this. And so I spent 3 hours with him on a video conference, and he helped me uncover, discover, and recover my genius talent. And what he does is he helps you formulate it into one sentence, and then 3 processing steps as to how you do your talent, and then why you do that one sentence again. So I thought I'd share mine. I don't know what he charges to do this, but he offered this to me pro bono, simply because we've been sharing some information back and forth and helping one another. So it worked out for me that I got this without having to pay for it, but it's worth paying for it, in my opinion. So what do I do? So my genius talent is this, is what I came up with. And I came up with this through an exercise where I had to breathe a certain way. I had to block everything out of my mind that, could be distracting. And I pictured myself with my eyes closed like I'm doing right now, like on a beach. And he walked me through that process and then brought me to places in my life where things happened and it made me feel a certain way, blah, blah, blah. And he took me from childhood all the way up to my current adult life. And then through that process, he's taking all these notes and then feeding things back to me and us having conversations around it. And it was a real strong, deep process of discovery. So what does Steve do? What do? I provide a sacred space for creative people to embrace themselves as they are, not as they think they should be, period. That's what I do. I make a living by providing a sacred space for people, especially creative people, to embrace themselves as they are and not as they think they should be. Your think you should be is always based upon somebody else's ideas and not your own. It's always based upon what somebody else does and not what you do. It's always based upon what somebody else looks like and not what you look like. So this think I should be, all the shoulds are leveraged by everybody else, not you. You have to learn to live with yourself as is. And the most fundamental aspect of intrinsic value is the ability to accept yourself and other people as is. And some people are experts at making you feel like shit. And that's what you need to realize. It doesn't mean you are that. It means they're good at making you feel like that. And so what do I say about that? Stay away from those people. It's that simple. Okay, so how do I provide a sacred space for creative people to embrace themselves as they are and not as they think they should be? Number one, I do it by gathering information based on their brain type and their behavioral, emotional, and motivational assets. So once I gather that information, I'm able to help them by also, number two, creating a blueprint out of these assets that allows them to fully understand and embrace who they really are, like at a real gut level, a real deep emotional brain level. Are you integrated in your brain? Are you analytical in your brain? Are you intuitive in your brain? Where are you and how does this work? What comes most natural to you? And this is my strength in finding these things. And also, number three, by using this information to move people seamlessly from a position of potential talent to actual talent so they can thrive rather than survive their space. Wow. Like, coming up with this was so powerful for me. And why do I do this for a living? Because I believe people's intrinsic value is unchangeable, and they need to see and accept it for the asset that it is. So my job is helping you uncover, discover, and recover your assets, your behavioral, emotional, and motivational assets. What moves you around in the world? Where do you consistently lean? Some people consistently lean in a direction of being in charge wherever they go. So wherever they go, if there's not a ladder to climb, then they will hit a wall and they will feel it. It's called brain tension. So people that do not have this leaning towards control and authority, then they have no problem yielding their position to avoid a controversy or to allow somebody else to be center stage and things like that. So being in situations where they're not forced to take charge and control and run things is really good for their brain type. And so once you discover your brain type and what it looks like and how it works, then we can, or you can, really focus your energies on finding a suitable place where all your assets are extremely necessary. Some people outgrow their environment. Some people grow into environments. Some people maintain an even pace with the environment as it grows. And some people outgrow the environment. You know this is true. How many friends in the last 5 years have you outgrown? Outgrown. We outgrow people. There's certain people that at one point in our lives, hanging out with them was a real asset. And we learned things, and we learned things about ourselves, and blah, blah, blah. But then after a while, it wasn't working. And typically a good, solid relationship has this even give and take. I'm with you, and I'm a benefit to you, and you're a benefit to me. And as we work through the relationship, we both grow in the relationship because we learn from one another. We learn from our assets. We learn from our liabilities. And it's powerful. Some relationships you'll have for a lifetime. Some jobs some people have for their whole working life. Now, this isn't as common as it used to be, but it does happen. I have a client, and there are people that have been there 40 years. A lot of people that have been there that long. And I have another client, 20 to 30 years. Everybody 20 to 30 years. And if they ask me to help them find a new person, they're like, Steve, I need you to find me somebody that'll be here at least 10 years. No pressure. So it's very powerful to understand that you can outgrow your environment. Think of a baby in a crib. The baby doesn't stay in the crib, and when our children were small, we had bassinets and carriages and little cribs and just different things. But as the child got older, we took them out of the crib and put them in a bed at one point. And so we need to realize that sometimes work is like a bed. It's a crib when we get there, but as we grow, the work doesn't, and we outgrow it. Sometimes you're not happy in an environment because you have outgrown the environment and you have a fear of the unknown, so you don't want to leave. Some people are very good at putting up with things they don't like. That can be an asset, but do you know that your strengths can become weak in the wrong environment? You may have a strength in one environment, you go to another environment, and that strength is no longer appreciated, necessary. So that strength is not a strength anymore. Okay? It's still, for you, an asset, but not there. Here's a good example. Take a basketball. Is it a good or a bad ball? Well, it depends, right? It doesn't, in and of itself, it's a fine ball. You put the basketball in the hands of somebody like Larry Bird, and we could see how fine that ball really is. But if you put a basketball in the hands of a quarterback in a football game, that's a problem. If you're playing basketball in a football stadium, that doesn't work. And so we don't say, oh, that's a bad ball. We say that's the wrong ball. The ball is not bad. The ball is not good. It's wrong. And so sometimes we have human beings that are footballs, but their work is a basketball game. Or they're a golf ball, and their work is a hockey game. And so you don't get rid of the ball. You take the golf ball and you put it on a golf course. And now it's perfect. And so I don't want you to look at yourself as a bad ball. If you're feeling bad, maybe there are circumstances that are causing you to feel bad, but that doesn't mean you are bad. Okay? That means the circumstances and surroundings are not working in an effort that promotes your assets. They're either not recognized or they're not in a position to be utilized or whatever the case may be. But it doesn't mean you don't have any, and it doesn't mean they're bad. So in wrapping this up, I just want you to think of yourself, focus on yourself. Where are you? What are you doing? How do your emotional, behavioral, and motivational assets, how are they functioning where you are, and are they recognized? Because if they're not, you may need to start thinking about an exit strategy or coming to terms with the fact that, gee, I'm a basketball, but this is not a basketball court. So I hope that helps, and you becoming your best self and relating better to the world around you and your circumstances. And until next time, this is Steve from rainy Plano in the mid-40s. You guys have yourself a really good week. Think about some of these things I said and maximize yourself to the best of your ability. So that's it. Have yourselves a good day, and we will chat again.